Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you if you are new to the study. I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin, and it's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we will be looking at the book of Daniel, chapter 5. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Daniel 5, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, and grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day has been going well. Pray that your week's going well so far. Happy Wednesday, beautiful day here in Nebraska. I pray wherever you are at that you are experiencing some good weather as well here in the early part of January. It feels more like spring here, but I'm glad that you're here and appreciate you taking time out to be a part of this study. We are journeying through the Bible one chapter at a time. We've made it now through 628 studies, 628 chapters, give or take, of the Bible so far. We are making really good progress, and now we are in chapter 5 of the book of Daniel. Only 12 chapters in this book, a short book, so we will be completed with this book by next Friday. And then a week from this upcoming Monday, we will move into the next book, the book of Hosea, which will be really the last of the longer books. It's only 14 chapters until we get to the end of the Old Testament and then into Matthew. So we're going to make some really quick progress once we get past Hosea and we start to get through some of these shorter books in the Old Testament. I would guess that by the end of April, we will have completed the Old Testament, but we'll see how things go. Because as you know, some of these chapters are short, some of them are much longer. Last night was a long study, and so I appreciate you being a part of that. And if you didn't get a chance to watch that study, you can go back. It's recorded. Take some time because it's almost an hour that we were in chapter 4 last night. But we are in chapter 5 of the book of Daniel, and now we are at Belshazzar's feast. We're at this feast that we're going to see Daniel appear at of this next king of Babylon, Belshazzar. And depending on the scholarly materials that you read, the different commentaries and things like that, some will proclaim that Belshazzar was never really a king of the Babylonian Empire. But there have been some modern discoveries that have shown that Belshazzar acted as a king during his father's frequent absences from the kingdom and his prolonged absences from the kingdom. So tonight is going to focus on Belshazzar and this this interesting encounter that he has and Daniel's interpretation. And again, a lot to look at here tonight. So let's get right into it. Open up your Bible to Daniel chapter 5. And if you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, all the verses are up here on the screen for you. You can follow along, take some good notes. Let's start with verse 1, chapter 5, the book of Daniel. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. Now, on the surface, that verse just seems pretty straightforward. This king threw a banquet, a lot of people came, and they drank some wine. But no, this is a big deal here. Now, first, a lot of critics will look at the size of this banquet, right? 1,000 nobles seems like a huge exaggeration, but just as we have the Jewish historian Josephus, there's an ancient historian by the name of Tacitus, And he wrote that these kings of Persia would frequently have these great banquets with thousands of people, sometimes upwards of tens of thousands of people. So this is not outside the realm of possibility that this king holds this large banquet with 1,000 people. Now later, when we get to the end of this chapter, we're going to see that Belshazzar held this banquet on the night that the city of Babylon, within the kingdom of Babylon, fell. The invading armies here, this was the Persians, and the Persians were comprised of two separate armies, the Medes and the Persians being the majority of this conglomerate of armies. By this point, they would have already come in and taken the surrounding countryside of Babylon. This would have been known about within the city. The people within the city would have known the intentions of what this invading army was going to do, but Belshazzar was going to dismiss this, right? This is an invasion coming in while he is throwing a huge party. Why did Belshazzar dismiss this threat? Well, the city of Babylon had not fallen to an invading army for over 1,000 years up to this point, because it was very well fortified. It was strong. It was protected. The city of Babylon, within Babylon, the nation, Babylon is think of it like a square, 13 and a half miles on each side, and a perimeter around this area of about 55 miles. This is very well protected area. That was just the urban area of Babylon. It was designed like no other city that we can think of today. When you think of a 55-mile perimeter around this 13-mile square city, that's pretty significant. And then a deep moat, a very wide moat of water, surrounded and formed the outer boundary around this perimeter. Within the city itself was a fortified wall. It was 76 feet wide, 300 feet high. That's a football field. I mean, this is pretty significant. And along the top of this wall, because it was 76 feet wide, there were passageways that a 4-horse chariot could fit on the top of this surrounding wall. All around the wall were gates. There were 100 different gates, all made of bronze. There were pillars. And then right through the center of the city was the Euphrates River, which was a very large river. It was very deep. It was very swift running river. So Belshazzar's confidence in the security of his capital is very evident here, that while the enemy is at his door, he's getting drunk in this banquet. He has no concern for this invading army because he thinks they are very well protected. The name Belshazzar itself means Bel, or the god Marduk of Babylon, has protected the king. His name means the gods are protecting me. So he has no concern over what's taking place here. This conquering army is pressing at the capital. And what does this king do? He takes refuge in a banquet of wine, and not just a banquet. We're going to see how intense this party got. Verse 2. So while Belshazzar is drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and the silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. If you remember, when the Babylonians invaded Jerusalem and they invaded the temple and they plundered it, they took all the treasures back. He says, bring them out. Why? Bring these goblets so that I can drink from them, and you nobles can drink from them, and my wives and the concubines, we can all drink from these spoils of war, these Jewish goblets. So Nebuchadnezzar was not Belshazzar's father. Now, in verse 2, it says that Nebuchadnezzar, his father. Nebuchadnezzar was his grandfather. But the original language commonly used the word father in the sense of an ancestor. In the Babylonian language, there's no word for grandfather. In Hebrew, there's no word for grandfather or grandson. That title is often deferred to as fathers or fathers' fathers. A single grandfather is never called father's father. A single grandfather is always referred to as father. So where it says Nebuchadnezzar, his father, that means his grandfather. Now, bring these goblets out so that I and the nobles and the wives and the concubines can drink. Now, the presence of the wives and the concubines of the kings at a banquet like this was not tolerated. So this is something different. This isn't just a banquet. This is a huge party where the wives and the concubines would be permitted to come. This is a big drunken feast going on here. Verse 3. So he orders them, bring the goblets. So they bring the goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines drink from them. So these goblets had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem and stored in some room somewhere as spoils of war, and now he wants them. Their presence, these goblets, of being stuck in a warehouse somewhere for storage until he brings them out, this was more humiliation of Yahweh, who, in the minds of the Babylonians, this God of Israel, we already humiliated him. God wasn't able to prevent the capture of these items from the temple. So this is just, in their eyes, further humiliation of the God of Israel. But using these goblets in praise of the gods of Babylon, this was worse than just possessing them, right? This is total blasphemy in the face of God. Not only could you stop us from taking these items, we're going to use them, and we're going to drink from them in honor of our gods. So verse 4, as they drank the wine, they praised the gods of God and silver and gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. These descriptions of Babylon's gods as being gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, this is a Hebrew perspective, because for the Israelites, they knew what idols were made of, bronze and silver and gold and wood. But for the Israelites, these gods of Babylon, these weren't gods at all. So again, this is just a smack in the face of the exiles and their God. We took your stuff. We're going to defame it by drinking it in honor of our gods, and there's nothing you or your God can do about this. It's just a plain act of defiance, meant to insult the God of Israel, whose temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by them. So again, as we saw in chapter 3 and as we saw in chapter 4 with Nebuchadnezzar, this pagan king Belshazzar sets himself up as being superior to Yahweh. Why is he doing this? We don't know. Maybe it was just to strengthen pride among the Babylonians, like, look how great we all are. Who knows? But this is what he's doing. And this is what happens. Verse 5, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared. That would be a bit frightening, and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. And the king watched the hand as it wrote. So just like Nebuchadnezzar received this omen from God of this grand tree that was cut down, Belshazzar is going to receive this omen from God. Um, this is a visual of a hand writing something on the wall. We're going to see what this is here in a little bit. This night of revelry for Belshazzar is now turned into a night of revelation. Verse 6. His face turned pale. I would imagine so. And he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The sight of this hand coming out of nowhere and writing on the wall completely unnerved Belshazzar. That fear may have been compounded by his drunken state, but even without that, it would have scared him to death. Me too. Verse 7. So he summons his enchanters, his astrologers, his diviners, and he says to these wise men, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. So all these sorcerers that Belshazzar is calling in, they were the scholars, they were the magicians, they knew the folklore of Babylon, they knew things, right? They were just a few of the many groups that were summoned. And he says to these wise men, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around their neck, made third highest ruler in the kingdom. So again, he repeats it, which stresses the importance of it. Clothing somebody in purple meant giving them royal authority. The color purple meant royalty. So I'm going to clothe you in royalty. The necklace of gold would have had great monetary significance. I'm going to clothe you in royalty and I'm going to make you rich. And so Belshazzar is promising to promote anybody who can interpret what this mysterious hand wrote on the wall and will make them the third ruler of the kingdom. He was the second, right? Nebuchadnezzar was the first, his grandfather, then Belshazzar. So the best he could do is, I can't make you the king, but I can put you third in line. Nebuchadnezzar, me, and then you. And then all the king's wise men came in, but they couldn't read the writing. They couldn't interpret it, and they couldn't tell him what it meant. The language in which this mysterious writing appeared is unknown. We don't know. The writer either recorded it exactly, if it was Aramaic, or translated it into the Aramaic, but we don't know the language of this mysterious writing. And that's why these wise men had a hard time interpreting it. They didn't know what it was. It's not that they didn't know the meaning of the words. They had no idea what the words even were. Verse 9, so Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew even more pale, and his nobles were baffled, right? Nobody knows what this means. The fact that none of these wise men could interpret it alarmed him even more. It puzzled everybody. So verse 10, so the queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, said, or came into the banquet hall and said, may the king live forever. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. So normally the queen here would be identified as Belshazzar's wife, right? He's the king, so we would think of her as the queen. But she wasn't necessarily the queen. It was the queen mother. She may have been the surviving wife of Nebuchadnezzar, but she most likely was not the wife of Belshazzar. Belshazzar's wives and concubines had been participating in this banquet. We saw that in verse 2. This woman enters into the banquet for the first time. So this is probably the queen mother, and she spoke to the king as a mother, right? More than a wife. Just Don't be afraid. And we're going to see she spoke as somebody who had personal acquaintance with either Daniel's earlier interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams or Daniel himself. So this was probably Belshazzar's mother, who was also the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. The queen mother, we've seen the queen mother before. We saw in 1 Kings, 2 Kings, Jeremiah. The queen mother was often a significant figure who had a lot of influence in the ancient courts of this time. So this woman, probably his mother, proceeds to do for Belshazzar what Arioch did for Nebuchadnezzar, which was to bring Daniel into the presence of the king. If you remember, Daniel said to Arioch, I can interpret this dream, bring me before him. She's bringing Daniel before Belshazzar to interpret. Verse 11, there is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, again, grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, the enchanters, the astrologers, the diviners. Your father did that, or your grandfather did this, because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding and the ability to interpret dreams and explain riddles and solve difficult problems. Don't be afraid, son. There's somebody here who can help. Call for Daniel. He'll tell you what this all means. So just as before with Nebuchadnezzar, when he summoned all these sorcerers, Daniel wasn't with them. Here again, he's not with them. We don't know why Daniel wasn't with these guys when they were summoned. But what that does is it sets Daniel off as being unique, right? That he didn't come with them to begin with. And it also tells us Belshazzar didn't know Daniel like Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar would have called for him. Belshazzar did not. So he probably didn't have that same relationship. Maybe by this point, Daniel's public service time had ended. We don't know. Regardless, his mother, the queen mother, tells him, bring Daniel before him. So, verse 13, Daniel was brought before the king Belshazzar, and he said to Daniel, are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight and intelligence and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and the enchanters who were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, they can't explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. So if you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple, you'll have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. So Belshazzar had heard of Daniel's reputation, even though he hadn't met him. And that could be because of what his mother just told him. But he says, I have heard all this. So he did know of his reputation. And he describes Daniel as a person with an extraordinary ability that comes from some divine source, right? Verse 14, the spirit of the gods is in you. So he calls him in. And he knows Daniel's in exile. He's a Jewish exile, right? He says that. But he's willing to give this exile all the honors that he had just promised to his own wise men, the clothed in purple and the gold and the third highest rank in the nation. So here's Daniel, a worshiper of the God that Belshazzar was dishonoring in this banquet by bringing in these goblets from the temple, who, ironically, on this night of all nights, was going to prove superior to the Babylonians in deciphering this message. It's very ironic, right? He's drinking from these goblets. He's dishonoring the God of Israel. So what does he do? He calls in a servant of the God of Israel to help him, while the God of Israel is about to let this army come in and destroy Babylon. This is desperation for Belshazzar. To reward a Jewish exile just shows his desperation and wanting to know the meaning of this puzzling message on the wall. So verse 17, so Daniel answers the king, you can keep your gifts, right? Give it to someone else. I'll interpret the writing for you and I'll tell you what it means, but you can keep all your robe, your gold. I don't want it, right? And whatever Daniel's reason for doing that, it's meant to help Belshazzar realize that those gifts weren't the reason for Daniel interpreting this message. He was going to do it without them anyhow. So you keep your gifts. I'll tell you what this means. Verse 18, Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father, Nebuchadnezzar, sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor, which was true. Because of the high position he gave to Nebuchadnezzar, all the nations and all the peoples of every language dreaded him and feared him. Those that he wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those that he wanted to spare, he spared. Those that he wanted to humble, he humbled. He was sovereign, right? But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne. He was stripped from his glory. We saw that last night. He was driven away from people, given the mind of an animal, right? That was chapter 4. He lived with the wild donkeys. He ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them who he wishes. So Daniel's reminding Belshazzar and everyone else in the room of the lesson in humility that God had just taught his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. The Most High God had given his grandfather this authority that he had and had taught him that even with all that authority, he was still under the authority of the sovereign God. It was Nebuchadnezzar's pride that had led him to behave arrogantly, just like Belshazzar's doing right now by drinking from these sacred vessels from the temple of God, the Most High God. It's a warning. You are doing what your grandfather just did. Verse 22, You, Belshazzar, his son, you have not humbled yourself. He did. You have not, even though you knew his story, right? Which he would. Belshazzar would have known this story of his grandfather being humbled and then repenting. And now you are doing it too. You have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles and your wives and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, these false idols. Your gods, you praised them while you drank from these goblets. They can't see or hear or understand, and you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life. So even though Belshazzar knew all about Nebuchadnezzar's pride and humiliation, he himself had not humbled his heart before the Lord of heaven and glorified him. This title, the Lord of heaven or the God of heaven, Daniel uses this phrase, Ezra, Nehemiah, it's used to describe Yahweh because that title, the Lord of heaven, was the title of the chief Syrian god that the people in the Persian Empire worshipped. And so by saying the Lord of heaven, the implication is that God transcends over all other gods, even the Syrian Lord of heaven and your god Marduk and all these other fake gods. It is God who is sovereign over all. Therefore, verse 24, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. So this is the same God that held Belshazzar's life and his ways in his hand and had sent another hand to write this inscription on the wall. In chapter 4, verse 31, it was Nebuchadnezzar who heard a voice from heaven while he was outdoors. Belshazzar sees a hand from heaven while he is indoors. And so here's the interpretation. Verse 25. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. Now, scholars have tired themselves trying to figure out how Daniel got this interpretation from these three words, mene, tekel, parsin, which were apparently Aramaic words. Scholars far beyond my knowledge don't know, right? Trying to figure out how Daniel interpreted this. So the best way to read this is this is inspired scripture. We just take it at face value, right? It's been said, and interestingly so, that Daniel could interpret these words because he recognized his father's handwriting, which was God. That's probably the best way to take this. What these words were, what language they were written in, here they are presented in Aramaic. How Daniel got to that conclusion, who knows? We'll take it as it is. It's the inspired word of God. But what we do know is all of these words reference measurements, measures of weight. So here's what these words mean. Verse 26, mene. What does mene mean? It's a measurement of weight in terms of number. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. So Daniel's interpreting this word as mene, which in Aramaic means numbered. So Daniel is understanding this word written by the hand of God to signify the number of years that God had prescribed before the Babylonian Empire ends. In other words, your days are numbered and time is up. And the repetition of this word, mene, mene, just stresses the point. So this is a word in some language. Daniel here writes it as an Aramaic word, mene, which means numbered. Verse 27, tekel. Tekel means you have been weighed on the scales and you have been found wanting. Tekel in the Aramaic is very similar to the Hebrew shekel, which is a measurement of weight. It means weighed. So here what that means is God has weighed Belshazzar and found him to be deficient, right? You have been found wanting. You were not the ruler that you should have been because of your flagrant refusal to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Most High God. So mene, your days are numbered. Tekel, you have been found deficient. And Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So Peres means broken into two or divided. It relates to the division of Belshazzar's kingdom into two parts. One part for the Medes, the other part for the Persians. Again, Persia and the Medes, they came together in this attack on Babylon. They defeated it. The kingdom was divided. Persia was the dominant kingdom in this Mede-Persian alliance, so they got more of the division. But that's what that means. Mene, your your time is up. Tekel, you are deficient, and Peres, your kingdom's divided into two. Part of it going to the Persians, part of it going to the Medes. Now again, the meaning of these words describing these various weights, they would have been unintelligible to the wise men of Babylon. And even if they came up with the same words in Aramaic that Daniel did, or in Hebrew, or in the Babylonian language, and even if they came up with the words numbered and weighed and divided, those words would have been meaningless without context. They wouldn't have known what that meant. And this is going back to chapter 2 of Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar had this vision of this statue, and the head was made of gold, which represented Babylon, and the body and the arms were made of silver, which represented the second dynasty, which would be the Persians, made of two parts, two arms, the Medes and the Persians. So now we've already started to come through this statue in this vision that Nebuchadnezzar had seen with the Babylonians and now the Persians. The third kingdom would have been the Greeks, the fourth, the Romans. And as Daniel is interpreting this dream, God's verdict against Belshazzar and the Babylonians, as he's doing that, the Persians and the Medes are pouring into the city. Just as God had judged Nebuchadnezzar's pride by removing him from the throne, which we saw that last night, he's going to judge Belshazzar's pride by taking the kingdom from him and giving it to another people, which was the Persians. It's the same thing God did with the people of Judah. He took that from them and gave it to the Babylonians and set Nebuchadnezzar up to be a sovereign ruler over all. His pride got in the way. God humbled that. Now his grandson's in charge, and God's going to do the same thing to the Babylonians that he did to the Judahites. Take that land from them and give it to another people, that being the Persians. Verse 29, and then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain placed around his neck. He was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Even though Daniel didn't want these things, and he said, keep your reward, Belshazzar kept his promise, which was in verse 16. Anybody who does this, I will do this. So he lavishes these things on Daniel. Remember, the Persians are invading, so these honors are only going to last a few hours at the most. But it's very surprising how Belshazzar responds here. Daniel's confronting him publicly in front of thousands of people, telling him, you're about to lose it all. He probably should have executed Daniel for treason there. So maybe there's an indication here Belshazzar's repenting by allowing Daniel to live. If he is, it's too late. The Persian army is already pouring into the city, and God's judgment has already come. So in its rise to power, the Babylonians, that empire, defeated the Egyptians, defeated the Israelites, defeated all these other nations, took Jerusalem, destroyed it, destroyed the temple, took all these spoils of war back, took all the inhabitants into exile, looted the temple, completely destroyed it. And its last official act here was to honor one of these exiles, Daniel, by lavishing these gifts on him, who by this divine revelation just predicted not only the downfall of the Babylonians, but the whole course of the time of the Gentiles until the Son of Man returns from heaven. The Greeks, the Romans, the 10 armies that will come in our time or to come before the return of Christ. The very last act of the Babylonian Empire was to lavish rewards onto this Jew exile from Judah. And that very night, verse 30, King Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. That very night would have been October 13th, 539 BC. The record of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel's story is the story of an overbearing king who experienced temporary judgment, repented, right, and was restored with blessing. The story of Belshazzar in Daniel is the story of a sacrilegious king who suffered permanent judgment. And this was all predicted. Isaiah predicted this. Isaiah 13, Isaiah 21, Isaiah 47. Jeremiah predicted it. Jeremiah 51. Daniel predicted it. The Persians invaded and took this city. Now, how? And I'll just really brief, right? Because I said at the beginning, this was surrounded by this huge wall and a big moat around it, and the Euphrates River ran right through it. According to ancient secular writers, the Persians diverted the water from the Euphrates River away from the city so that it flowed into a nearby ancient lake, which allowed the riverbed to dry up, which allowed them to march into the city. I mean, they just walked into the city untouched and allowed them to scale these undefended walls that flanked the river, because Belshazzar saw no reason to post guards on these walls. They were 300 feet tall. The Persians, they just waltzed right in. Belshazzar left his guard down. He was killed. The city was defeated, and the Persians took over. And that is Daniel chapter 5. And I pray that has been a help to you. Going back to verse 31, Darius the Mede took over the kingdom. At this point, at the age of 62, Babylon has now fallen. And it's Darius the Mede, right, who is in charge of Babylon from this Medo-Persian alliance. It's really the Persians who are in charge, but Darius the Mede would be the one that would take over rulership of Babylon. And that's what we're going to see tomorrow in chapter 6. Darius is going to be the prominent figure in chapter 6, and tomorrow we will look at that, and we're going to see Darius's pride. So thank you for being here this evening. Again, I do pray that this has been a help to you, and I appreciate you being here. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care. God bless. Bye-bye.